He spit near my shoe. Not on it, just close enough that we both knew what it meant. A deliberate miss. A power move wrapped in a grin. I stared at the frothy dot of saliva sizzling against the concrete like acid, wondering how much of this rooftop was watching. Most weren't. Too busy laughing into flutes of Dom Perignon and slapping each other on the back. But a few saw. A VP with thinning hair glanced away. Another woman, maybe a junior analyst, froze mid-laugh, then turned back to her group, pretending not to see. And then Gavin strutted off like he'd just pissed on a hydrant. Jesus, my wife muttered under her breath. He's had a lot. That's not how he normally is. Her voice shook just enough to make me feel something ugly. Not rage, not yet. Just recognition. He's just joking, she said again, louder this time like she was convincing herself. Of course he is, I said, smiling thinly. He seems hilarious. The words didn't match my tone. I think she caught that. Her fingers twitched at her wine stem, but she didn't look at me. Instead, she faced the skyline like it held answers. Manhattan glittered just beyond the glass wall, beautiful and distant. Like her. I stepped away without another word, slid through the crowd like a shadow in a tailored suit. Not one person looked at me twice, and that was perfect. Here's something most people don't realize. Silence is camouflage. Play the role, smile politely, nod when spoken to, stay close enough to be ignored. I didn't dress loud, didn't flash credentials. My cufflinks were simple platinum, no monogram, no logo. The kind you notice only if you know what they cost. They didn't. They saw a husband, maybe a nobody, maybe one of those suburban support husbands who married up and now trails behind his career wife like a lost puppy with a mortgage. The kind of guy who grills on Sundays and tells his buddies she's the real breadwinner, with a laugh too long to be honest. That's what Gavin saw. That's what he thought he was spitting on. The irony would have made me laugh if I wasn't calculating, because Gavin wasn't just her boss. He was also the COO of Halverson Stride, the firm that just got quietly swallowed up by one of my holdings in a three-step silent acquisition finalized 6 days ago. I didn't even attend the last negotiation round. That's what general counsel and shell boards are for. And my wife? She hadn't asked many questions when I started staying late more often. She assumed I was tinkering with some new side venture. That's the story she liked, made her feel like the center of gravity. I let her keep it. She didn't know that the man Gavin just spat at technically now had more say in this company's fate than Gavin ever would again. And Gavin was about to have a very long quarter. He just didn't know it yet. Oh, and before I continue, I'll just say this once. If you're still listening and haven't hit that subscribe button, more than 97% of people don't. It only takes a second, and yeah, it helps the team behind these stories keep delivering the good stuff. Anyway, I stood at the edge of the rooftop, watching Gavin lean in too close to some intern with a name badge that said Isabel. He whispered something, and she laughed awkwardly, like a deer laughing at the sound of a rifle bolt. He was in his element, loud, crass, magnetic to the worst kinds of people. My wife tried to laugh along with them, but she kept glancing back at me. She looked like she'd swallowed glass. Good. She knew the line had been crossed. She just didn't know how much it mattered. What she also didn't know, what nobody at that rooftop circus realized, was that I had already reviewed Gavin's full HR file. I knew about the alcohol budget that didn't match the receipts. I knew about the unapproved travel charges and the curious per diem loopholes. I knew about the complaint that got resolved quietly 2 years ago, right before a junior associate left the company without exit paperwork. I also knew who buried it, and why. But I wasn't here to make noise. Not yet. I was here to see how far he'd go when he thought the world was his and no one was watching. And Gavin, bless him, didn't disappoint. The thing about masks is, they're not always for hiding. Sometimes, they're for watching. Gavin didn't recognize me, not just in the literal sense. He truly had no concept of me. I was a cardboard cutout in the background of his world, the anonymous husband who arrived late to holiday parties and never added anything useful to the conversation. His words, not mine. I'd heard them once, slurred at a previous event I hadn't even been invited to. That guy? No spine. Can't imagine what she sees in him. Probably just glad she brings in the paycheck. Said it loud enough that she had to pretend she didn't hear it. She never corrected him. That was the part that stuck. Gavin thought I was the kind of man who buys tires on payment plans, the kind of man who sits through dinner with his wife's boss because he's scared of making waves. Gavin didn't ask what I did for work. Nobody in that firm did. Not because I was mysterious, but because none of them cared to ask. My wife didn't offer clarity either. She liked the contrast. It made her rise feel steeper. Her team whispered about her dragging a civilian to industry events. She pretended to be embarrassed by it, but she drank up the attention. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the civilian had orchestrated the buyout of Halverson Stride Holdings through 2 layers of private equity silence. The man who got laughed at in a cheap suit 1 year ago walked the halls of power now with his name buried in quarterly filings they hadn't even read yet. The shell company? Obsidian Valley Capital, owned by a trust. That trust? Structured through an LLC I'd registered in Nevada 7 years ago. The path to the top of their org chart ran through a maze I built myself. By the time the ink dried, Gavin's leash was already clamped. I didn't tell my wife. Why would I? She liked the power imbalance too much, loved being the one with the answers, the networker, the one who made things happen. She called it balance, but it always leaned her way. If I brought home news, it was cute. If she landed a client dinner, it was a career milestone. I didn't mind. Until Gavin spat on the concrete and she said nothing. I gave her space to say something, to even look at me with disgust toward him. Instead, she shrunk, then deflected. He's just drunk, she said. It's how he is with everyone. I wasn't everyone, but she wanted me to be. Fine, let them believe I was the mascot, the trailing spouse, the mute dinner guest. It made what came next so much more pure. The acquisition had been in the works for months, a quiet undervaluation, a few leaked rumors that Halverson was bloated, disorganized, soft. We seeded enough doubt into the industry to start a mild exodus of talent. 2 managers, 1 compliance lead, and a rockstar analyst. All gone in 60 days. That's when the board got nervous. Obsidian came in offering stability. They jumped, and Gavin somehow still hadn't figured out that he was now middle management under a firm he didn't even know existed last quarter. That wasn't a bug. That was the design. I wanted to see who would kneel automatically and who'd need pushing. Gavin needed pushing. He strutted around like an unkillable cockroach. Meanwhile, my legal team was drafting his enhanced contract for review. His exit had to be clean, but poetic. I read through it again that night in my study while my wife was brushing her teeth upstairs. She didn't ask why I wasn't in bed. She just assumed I was on YouTube, watching woodworking tutorials or some other quiet hobby that kept me out of her way. I scrolled through Gavin's public Instagram instead. Him with a cigar captioned, "Some wolves don't lose sleep over the opinions of sheep." Cute. The man had an entire identity built around being the predator in the room. I almost pitied him. Almost, but not quite. Because I'd already seen the HR complaint from last fiscal year, the one about persistent verbal hostility and inappropriate jokes at firm events. The woman who filed it resigned. No NDA, no hush money. It was buried through internal reclassification, labeled a personality conflict. The head of HR, one of Gavin's golf buddies, the kind who plays badly on purpose and laughs like it's charming. I saved a copy of the report anyway, time-stamped, digitally verified. By the time I was done reading, my coffee had gone cold. I didn't heat it up. I liked it bitter. She waited until the house was quiet to bring it up. That was her pattern, never during the drive home, never while the lights were still on. She needed darkness, like a confession booth, where her voice could tremble without consequence. "I just wanted to say, about Gavin," she said from the hallway, her reflection caught in the glass of our built-in bookshelf. "He was out of line, obviously, but he didn't mean it like that." I didn't look up. I was in the living room, the only light coming from my laptop screen. The rest of the house was dim, intentionally. I'd gotten used to doing my real work in shadows, more honest that way. She stepped into the room, arms crossed like she was the one wronged. "He gets stupid when he drinks. You know how some guys just run their mouth?" "He spit near my shoe," I said, still not looking at her. "That wasn't his mouth running. That was aim." She didn't reply, just hovered there, fiddling with the sleeve of her cardigan like it was going to defend her from accountability. "I talked to HR about it," she offered after a pause, like it was a gift. "Not formally, just mentioned it. Told them it made me uncomfortable." I finally glanced at her. "Did you mention that you stood there and said nothing when he did it?" Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again with a weaker pitch. "I didn't want to make a scene." "No," I said, returning to my screen. "You didn't." That was the end of that conversation. She lingered a little longer, waiting, I think, for me to rise to the occasion, to say something that would let her off the hook. I didn't. Once I heard her footsteps heading upstairs, I opened the file I'd been waiting on. exicrestructure_final_v3.pdf. The team had finalized it earlier that afternoon. My notes had been implemented with surgical precision. Gavin's title was gone, his role splintered into strategy liaison and cultural compliance coordinator. Neither of those were real jobs. They were transitionary titles, shelves with trapdoors. The official leadership restructure would be announced internally next month, then leaked externally the day after. Gavin would be praised in the press release for his instrumental role in helping the firm evolve. Then, quietly, his retention bonus would be revoked under Clause 14. Misconduct triggers, already satisfied. He wouldn't see it coming. He still thought he was in line for a promotion. I clicked over to my encrypted workspace where the incident report was being updated in real time. Gavin's name appeared again, this time attached to a new entry. A woman named Priya, Finance Department. Complaint categorized as inappropriate comments, recurrent. That made 3 internal sources, 2 named. That was the magic number. Strategically, I could have pulled the trigger then and there, but that wasn't the point. Not yet. It wasn't about firing him. It was about dismantling the illusion of his invincibility piece by piece while he smiled for photos. I scrolled through his calendar, still wide open, still marked mentorship lunches and client dev. It was like watching a man decorate his gallows. Upstairs, the sound of water running in the master bathroom signaled my wife had moved on. She always did. She had no idea that I was orchestrating the firm's tectonic shift right under her, that I had signed off on her own department's relocation plans last week. I'd even reviewed the seating charts. She'd be reporting to someone else soon, a woman from Seattle with a zero-tolerance policy for internal fraternization. No more rooftop parties, no more whiskey in the HR office, and certainly no more "he didn't mean it" defenses. I shut the laptop and sat there for a while, not thinking, just waiting. That's the part people underestimate the most, the patience. They think revenge is fireworks, a grand finale. It's not. It's the silence before the blast, the stillness in the room right before the chandelier falls, and Gavin was still dancing underneath it. The boardroom looked like every other one I'd ever built from behind a curtain, long table, glossy surface, overpriced carafes of alkaline water, faux sincere art on the walls, every chair chosen for ergonomic function and psychological posture, the kind of room designed to make people feel powerful right before they get stripped bare. Gavin arrived late. Of course he did. Shirt slightly wrinkled, hair freshly gelled like a car salesman's last pitch before the quarterly quota hits. He made a show of greeting the board with fingergun nods and a loud, "Let's keep this short, yeah? Got a lunch with DevOps." The CEO didn't laugh. He had the kind of stillness only found in someone who's recently survived a corporate ambush. Pale, sharp-eyed, trimmed down to efficiency. His tie was gray and stiff, and his opening line was flatter than the conference phone in the center of the table. "We've received multiple complaints," he began, tapping the folder in front of him with 2 fingers. Anonymous, detailed, dates cross-referenced. Most refer to a pattern of misconduct at external company events, specifically hostile behavior, inappropriate contact, and, quote, unprofessional displays of dominance in front of non-staff guests. You could hear the muscles in the room tighten. Gavin snorted, actually snorted. Jesus, people are filing complaints over the party now? That was a networking event, not church. No one joined his laugh. Then he leaned back in his chair, tried to recover. Seriously though, that party was employees only. Who's even qualified to call it hostile? The room was quiet for a breath. 2. Then the CFO, a man I'd shared 2 cigars with last fiscal year, glanced at me. "Our partner attended," he said mildly, nodding in my direction. Quiet man, observant. Gavin turned his head, slow at first, then sharply, like someone realizing a shadow had teeth. His lips parted, not a smile, not a word, just a micro-freeze. Enough. Then the chair scraped. It wasn't mine. It was his. The sound of it against polished wood was obscene. Everyone looked. Even the assistant outside the glass wall stopped walking. Gavin stood halfway, hesitated, then sat again, too fast. A man who suddenly didn't know the dimensions of the room he was in. The CEO looked at him. "Would you like to say something?" Gavin blinked. No, just was gonna stretch." No one believed him, and that's the moment he knew. Something was wrong. He didn't know how deep it ran, but the water around his ankles was rising. For the rest of the meeting, he stopped talking, didn't ask about the Q3 projections, didn't weigh in on the downsizing of the Dallas office, didn't interrupt when the VP of Risk said the words compliance audit with just enough force to make his voice echo. Instead, he sat still, hands folded like a kid in detention, eyes darting toward me more than once. I didn't return the look, didn't blink, didn't shift, just sat and listened, like I'd been doing all along. Let him wonder. Let him remember the rooftop. Let him replay the moment the CFO referred to me as a partner, when every face around that table nodded like it was common knowledge, like they'd all been told, and he hadn't, because he hadn't. That was the beauty of it. Everyone in that room was now in on the joke, except Gavin, and the laughter had stopped. The memo landed on everyone's desk like a paper ghost. No header, no fanfare, just an internal subject line, leadership review and alignment initiative. HR tried dressing it up with jargon, realignment for strategic synergy, assessment of executive continuity, all that sterile nonsense. But the message was clear to anyone who read between the lines. One name stood out in bold: Gavin Merrow, Chief Operating Officer, status under review. That same morning, he stormed into HR like he owned the floor, slamming the glass door so hard the hinges groaned. The receptionist didn't flinch. She'd seen it before, but the HR director, a woman named Kay with the temperament of a steel trap, didn't even look up when he barked, "Is this some kind of joke?" She flipped a page in her binder. "I'm sorry, Gavin. I can't comment on internal assessments." "I'm not asking for a comment, Kay. I'm asking who the hell thinks they can review me without even notifying me." She clicked her pen, circled something on a form, and replied, "Your employment contract includes a review clause at executive discretion. You signed it. It's not discretionary." He leaned in over the desk. "Discretionary by who?" She looked at him, actually looked this time. Her face was neutral, but her eyes said, "You're not in the room you think you're in anymore." "Executive ownership has shifted, Gavin," she said. "You may want to bring your questions to the partner liaison, or legal." Legal. The word hit him like a second coffee to the chest. He left HR without slamming the door. Small change, measured panic. That evening at home, I caught my wife staring into her wine glass, the stem pinched too tightly. She hadn't said much since the party, just fragments of safe conversation. Now she broke the silence like a glass under tension. "Gavin's position is being reviewed." I nodded, eyes on the stovetop, stirring the risotto she thought I couldn't make. She hesitated. "Did you say something?" I turned, spoon still in hand. "I didn't have to." She looked at me too long. Something inside her shifted. Not fear exactly. Not yet. But a kind of rewiring, like she was seeing something in my face that didn't fit the man she kept in her peripheral vision all these years. She didn't ask more. She didn't have to. Because Gavin wasn't the only one starting to realize the scenery had changed. 3 days later, Gavin pulled out his personal laptop and tried to trace the new structure. The gossip in the break room had reached fever pitch. Words like roll-up, umbrella firm, asset consolidation floated through every conversation he wasn't invited to anymore, and the silence around him was getting louder. He pulled old decks, skimmed footnotes, dredged emails looking for names that weren't there before. That's when he found it. Buried inside the updated stakeholder agreement filed with the SEC under Obsidian Valley Capital LLC, there it was, the trust name he didn't recognize, followed by a single operating signatory. My name, first and last. He blinked at the screen like it had betrayed him, because this wasn't a partner. This wasn't some ghost investor. This was the man whose shoe he spat next to, the man he laughed at, the man who stood still and smiled like an idiot while he groped his wife's hip and told him to wait his turn. Now that man's name was above his on the org chart. He slammed the laptop closed, but it didn't matter. He'd already seen it. The panic didn't come in one wave. It came in layers: realization, denial, search, confirmation. Then that brittle silence where you start calculating how many favors you still have left, and how many of those people are already looking the other way. His world hadn't just shifted, it had been rotating beneath him for months, and he never noticed. Until now, and now was far too late. The envelope looked like salvation, thick cardstock, foil stamped, delivered to Gavin's office by hand, his name in block serif, a corporate kiss sealed in prestige. HR said it came from upstairs, which, in Gavin's mind, meant vindication. Maybe someone finally recognized his value. Maybe this was his moment to rise above the shadow of scrutiny and reclaim his throne. The attached note was brief, professional, deliberately vague. "In recognition of your continued leadership and vision, we are offering a new role with expanded oversight, details enclosed." No titles, no warning signs, just a breadcrumb of ego leading to a trap. He opened it with the kind of hunger you see in cornered men, equal parts desperation and pride. Inside, a new contract, more pay, more authority, a hybrid title that meant everything and nothing. Chief Growth Architect. He didn't even read the full thing, just skimmed for numbers, bonuses, dates, signatures. He missed Clause 14 on page 6. Technically, it wasn't hidden. In fact, it was centered, bolded. But Gavin, like most predators, only noticed what flattered him. Clause 14 wasn't flattering. It read, "In the event that substantiated misconduct complaints are filed by more than 2 internal parties during any quarter, the undersigned agrees to immediate forfeiture of all retention bonuses and benefits, effective retroactively. Legalese 4, if 3 people tell the truth, you're screwed." 2 complaints had already been filed. One more, and the trap would close. But Gavin didn't know that. He was too busy texting a former client, bragging about his new role. "Finally got the title I deserve. Hell of a raise, too. Told you they'd come crawling." He signed the offer before noon. Blue ink, confident flourish, initialed every page like he was autographing a win. Back at HQ, the scanned document landed in my inbox. I read it slowly, letting every word settle like sediment in a glass of scotch. The contract was flawless. Our legal team had wrapped it in compliance gold. Every bulletproof clause was double reviewed by risk analysts and HR partners alike. Clause 14 wasn't about catching Gavin, it was about letting him catch himself. He'd just signed the instrument of his own collapse. That same afternoon, HR's compliance officer logged a third complaint. Not submitted yet, just noted, time-stamped. A junior staffer named Elena had come forward. Nothing dramatic, just a pattern of inappropriate mentoring sessions where Gavin got a little too personal, a little too late night, a little too handsy with compliments. Enough. We'd wait for the filing, let it drip into the system like the final bead of poison. Meanwhile, Gavin paraded through the office like a man reborn, called a lunch meeting to realign core innovation goals, talked about scaling culture, whatever the hell that meant. He started using phrases like "under my directive" and "as the architect of this phase." The staff smiled politely, some even clapped when he made jokes. But behind every smile was a countdown, and in every meeting someone was taking notes. At home, my wife finally said it. "I heard Gavin got a new title." "Yeah," I said, eyes on my laptop. "They say he's consolidating departments." I nodded. "Must be exciting for him." She paused, just long enough to ask it. "Did you promote him?" I smiled at the screen, then turned to her. "Technically, he promoted himself. I just offered him the pen." Her silence was thicker than denial now. It had matured into suspicion. She didn't know which version of me was real anymore, the quiet man she used to interrupt at dinner, or the one who now played puppet master in her professional life. She didn't ask more, which told me everything. Gavin, meanwhile, strutted deeper into the castle, oblivious that the moat had been drained, the drawbridge pulled, and the torches lit. All he had left was that signed contract and a fuse burning silently beneath his chair. She came home late again. This time she didn't fill the air with excuses. No breathless, "Sorry, I lost track of time." No cheap perfume from rushed wine nights. No forced laughter about Gavin's antics. Just the quiet thunk of her heels at the door, her purse sliding down the hallway wall like it weighed double tonight. She found me in the kitchen, slicing citrus for a drink I didn't need. Her blouse was wrinkled. Her voice was flatter than I'd ever heard it. "He's panicking," she said. No names. We both knew who. "People say there's someone big behind this. Like, really big." I dropped a lime wedge into the glass, let the silence stretch until it frayed. "Maybe he should have treated people better," I said, not looking up. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed tight against her chest. Defensive posture, but not defensive of him. Something else now, defensive of the space between us, like she was starting to suspect she was standing on a fault line. "HR won't say anything," she added, "but the directors are nervous. It's like everything flipped, and no one saw it coming." That was the first honest thing she'd said in weeks. She watched me sip my drink, waited for a twitch of reaction, a flinch, a confession. I gave her none. The next day, the spiral completed its first visible turn. Gavin was halfway through a vision presentation when the door opened. Not a knock, just the kind of smooth, authoritative entry that tells the room someone else is running the show now. 2 people from HR, 1 from legal, 1 from internal affairs, an older woman with the kind of expression that didn't change for anyone. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't apologize for the interruption. They simply said, Gavin, please come with us. He laughed at first, that cocky, nasal thing he did when he thought people were overreacting. Can it wait? I'm mid-deck here. No, said Legal. The air in the room changed, like a power grid flickering. He looked around. No eye contact, not even from the interns. He closed the laptop. His voice dipped. Can someone tell me what this is about? You already know, said HR. My wife was in that meeting. Second row, eyes forward. She watched Gavin collect his water bottle like it was armor, like he still thought he could walk out of there with dignity. He tried to speak to one of the VPs on the way out. The VP looked away. No one clapped. No one asked a question. The projector light dimmed. Gavin left the room. He never came back. I got the text a few minutes later. One word. Why? Not, what happened? Not, did you know? Why? I stared at it a while. The glass in my hand sweated onto the wood. She'd seen too much now, enough to know this wasn't karma. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't even policy. It was surgical. She knew someone had been pulling the strings, and for the first time, she was starting to believe it might have been me. I didn't respond. Let her sit with the question, because for all her office instincts, all her years building connections and playing status games, she'd never once thought to ask what I actually did when I said I had work to catch up on. She was married to a mask. She liked that. It kept her spotlight bright. But now, the mask had teeth, and she'd just seen it bite. She came into the kitchen like she was walking into a courtroom. No makeup, no jewelry, no facade, just her, exhausted, scared, and finally aware that whatever playbook she'd been using no longer applied. I was at the island, calmly slicing the end off a blood orange. The juice ran like a red smear across the cutting board. Fitting. She stood there watching, probably expecting some version of me she could still control with a sigh, a raised eyebrow, a guilt trip. But I didn't speak first. She did. Did you? Her voice cracked. Did you plan all this? I set the knife down next to the fruit, picked up my glass, swirled the scotch once before placing it gently on the counter. He spat on me, I said evenly. Told me to wait my turn. I looked her in the eyes for the first time in weeks. I don't wait, darling. She flinched. It wasn't the word. It was the tone. She used to use that word to cut me down at social functions, soften her dismissals in front of friends. Darling, that's not your lane. Darling, can you let the adults handle this? Now it sounded different, weaponized. She took a step back, gripping the counter edge like the house had tilted. What even are you? I didn't answer, not directly. Instead, I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out a black folder. Simple, no logos, no gold seals, just clean lines and consequence. I handed it to her across the marble. She stared at it like it might explode. What's this? Your reassignment package, I said. New role, new department, new location. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Seattle? She whispered. This is real. I nodded once. The restructuring initiative needed a clean line between prior fraternization and current compliance. It's all standard procedure. I reviewed it myself. Her mouth opened, then closed. She tried to find the fight, tried to summon outrage, but the foundation had already been eroded too deep. She was standing in quicksand, clutching a paper life raft. You moved me? She asked, barely audible. Technically the board did, I said, but I signed off on the transition. Conflict of interest optics. You understand? A beat of silence. Then, you're not the man I married. No, I said, sipping my drink. You married the version of me you thought you could manage. This version just stopped pretending. She sat down, didn't ask permission, just collapsed into the chair across from me, folder still open in her lap like a Bible she didn't know how to read. You've been planning this. For how long? Long enough to know Gavin's fall wouldn't be enough, I said. The rot's deeper than him. It's cultural, structural. That firm needed amputation, not a Band-Aid. She stared at me, then at the file again. I thought you didn't care about that stuff. Corporate games, titles. You always said, I said what you needed to hear, I interrupted. So you'd keep underestimating me, just like everyone else. Her breath caught in her throat. You made me part of it. No, I said calmly. You made yourself part of it when you watched him spit on me and said nothing. She blinked hard, once, twice. The sound of the refrigerator motor humming was the only thing filling the room. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the island. This isn't revenge, I said. This is architecture. I'm building something cleaner, stronger. And you, well, you can be part of it. Or not. That's your decision. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. Not yet. Why Seattle? Distance, I said simply. Clean break from Gavin's orbit, from everything that made you hesitate. Her lip trembled, but she didn't speak. I stood, taking my drink with me, walking past her to the doorway. You always liked being the one who made the moves, I said without turning back. Now you're looking at someone who made the whole board. And then I left her there, folder open, career redrawn, staring at the man she thought she could explain. The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent, save for the soft hiss of air vents and the distant hum of wealth moving behind walls. The doors slid open to a hallway I'd designed years ago, not literally, but structurally. I'd chosen the architecture firm that laid this foundation, vetted the leadership team behind the buyout, strategized the mergers that turned their brass nameplates into paperweight liabilities. This building didn't have my initials carved into the marble, but it may as well have. I walked through the double glass doors, and this time, no one asked who I was here to see. The boardroom was filled, notebooks open, tablets glowing. The long obsidian table reflected every polished shoe, every clipped nod. These were the new ranks, people who thought in decimals and acted in chess moves. At the head of the table stood the new CEO, promoted during the restructuring. Young, precise, and most importantly, loyal. He cleared his throat as I entered. Everyone, before we begin, allow me to introduce our strategic partner and oversight lead moving forward. He gestured toward me. This is Mr. Harper. Not consultant, not advisor, not guest. Just a title and a name, mine. I took 2 measured steps into the room, pausing briefly as I caught the first ripple move through the crowd. A VP leaned over and whispered to the man beside him. He was at the party? Another whispered back, more stunned than curious. That's him? I gave neither the satisfaction of a glance. I made my way to the empty chair at the end of the table. Gavin's chair once. It had no nameplate now, just a void. His absence filled the room louder than any apology could have. I placed a single folder in front of me, unopened. I wouldn't need it. Everyone else would be taking notes. The meeting began without preamble. The new structure was outlined, territories reassigned, leadership chains reconfigured, names announced, faces frozen, promotions issued, some revoked. At no point did I raise my voice. Authority doesn't need volume. It needs silence that makes others lean in. Then, 10 minutes in, I felt her eyes. My wife. She was sitting in the back of the gallery, beside the legal observer bench. Not dressed to be seen, simple blouse, understated heels, hair pulled back tight. The look of someone not sure if they're attending a funeral or an interview. She didn't fidget. She didn't blink. But she didn't understand what she was seeing either, because in her world, I'd always been the man who waited in the car, the man who arrived at events half an hour early to avoid traffic, then stood alone with a soda while she networked. Now I was the man with his name on every slide deck, the man whose presence made VPs whisper and legal teams clear their schedules. I didn't look at her, not directly, not yet. This wasn't the moment for reconciliation. This was the moment of redefinition. The CFO spoke up. We're finalizing the schedule for the cultural integration workshops. Any adjustments needed? I shook my head once. Only one, I said. If the Seattle transition doesn't include Gavin's final staffers, trim the fat. No reason to drag dead weight across the country. No one objected. No one even paused. The room was already learning. The meeting continued. A few murmurs, a few pale faces. Some eyes flicked toward the gallery and then back to their notes. They all knew the story now, or at least the parts that mattered. The rest, they'd fill in with fear. I stood as the meeting closed. The CEO said something polite, probably scripted. I didn't respond, just nodded once and collected my folder. As I passed the gallery, I could feel her watching me, trying to catch my eye. I didn't give her that. Not yet. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was ascension. She picked the place, small, tucked between an antique bookstore and a florist that was always half closed. One of those cafes that tried too hard to be rustic, with copper mugs and Edison bulbs like sincerity could be bought in bulk. She was already there when I arrived, seated at a two-top in the corner, fingers wrapped around a coffee she hadn't touched. I sat without speaking, took my time removing my coat, folding it over the back of the chair. She looked older than I remembered, not in years but in weight. Whatever armor she'd worn at work, it had cracked. The lines in her face had deepened. Her posture wasn't confident anymore. It was careful. I didn't know you were that, she said, finally. I stirred cream into my own coffee, no sugar. No one needed to know, I said gently, until they spit on the wrong man. Her eyes flicked down. She smiled, just slightly. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. She traced the rim of her mug with one finger. People are still talking. Gavin's severance disappeared. HR's been completely restructured. There's a rumor you froze 3 expense accounts just to make a point. I sipped. Let the bitterness linger before answering. Only 2. She didn't laugh. She didn't argue. Just looked at me like I was someone she'd read about, not someone she used to correct in front of guests. So, she started. What now? I paused, set my cup down, looked her in the eye. You can stay, I said. We can start over. Redraw the map. But know this, respect isn't optional anymore. She looked stunned, but not offended. Something about the simplicity of the words made them land heavier, like a final clause she hadn't read the first time around. I thought I was doing what people do, she said, building a career, keeping my head down, playing the game. You were, I said. You just didn't ask who built the board. She closed her eyes for a second, maybe to rewind, maybe to mourn the version of herself that got away with things, the moments she dismissed me, the silences that cost more than any argument could have. I never meant to make you feel small, she whispered. You didn't, I said. You just assumed I was. The table was quiet after that. No check came. No music played. Just the low clink of spoons and ceramic and the hum of 2 people sitting in the wreckage of a life they both co-authored, neither one holding all the blame, but one clearly holding the pen now. She looked out the window, toward the street where the city's lights flickered against puddles from a recent rain. Headlights passed in slow pulses. Life moved on. She still hadn't answered. I didn't rush her, because this wasn't about her anymore. This was about reclaiming gravity, about choosing what orbit I allowed and what I left behind. When I finally stood, she looked up again. Will I see you again? She asked. I don't know, I said. Depends which version of me you're looking for. And with that, I left her there, in the quiet, in the space where respect used to be optional, and outside, the city didn't wait for either of us.